Hello, and thank you for joining us on World Now. I am Olamide Adeyemi. Well, former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has been released from jail. He was released 3 weeks into a 5-year prison term for taking part in a criminal conspiracy. Nicolas Sarkozy will, however, be subject to strict judicial supervision and barred from leaving France ahead of an appeal trial due to be held next year. Recall that on the 21st of October, the former center-right president was sentenced to 5 years for conspiring to fund his 2007 election campaign with money from late Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. His legal team immediately filed a request seeking his release. Reacting after his release, Mr. Sarkozy said in court, "My energy is focused solely on the single goal of proving my innocence. The truth will prevail." The end of the story is yet to be written. End of his statement there. Still talking reactions, Christopher Igran, one of Sarkozy's lawyers, hailed his client's release as a step forward and said they will not be preparing for the appeal trial expected in March. One condition of Sarkozy's release is he does not contact any other witness in the so-called Libyan dossier or any justice ministry employees. And global affairs analyst Ejike Opa joins me on World Now to discuss this latest development in France and what this really means for the government at this time. It's good to have you join us.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Right, so let's start with what this, early release means for someone that was sentenced to a 5-year sentence, serving just 3 weeks. What does this say about the flexibility of France's justice system when it comes to high-profile individuals?
Well, I mean, Sarkozy is not your average, prisoner. He was a former president, and of course, he has a lot of influences. He has a lot of sympathizers. But the question that he needed to be asked is how come whatever it is he's saying he's going to now use to prove his innocence was never introduced in the trial, sessions. So, it's how the law works in some countries, and so everybody's now sort of like interested to see what is this new evidence, that will prove he was, he shouldn't even have been tried to talk of being convicted. So that's what it is. But again, he was a former president, not your average Frenchman, and so he's going to get all kinds of considerations and concessions until we do the next level.
I mean, this seems like a legal intervention, perhaps an advice from his own lawyers for some of these things not to have been introduced in the trial. But I'm wondering what grounds he really will be relying on, saying that he's focusing his energy on proving his innocence even after a judgment has been given. What kind of grounds do you think he may be relying on as a former president?
Well, again, is maybe during the appeal process, because I guess in the French case, you get convicted, you have this some time to appeal it, and maybe during this appeal time is when he provided this information, and they said, okay, fine, we're going to let you come out, and then we'll go to the next level. So, countries are different in how they look at laws. So the French law is obviously going to be different from the US or Nigeria or anywhere else. But, this could be a media sensation. He wants to get attention to himself, or, his lawyer's advice told him, hey, don't bring this up. Let's see whether they will convict you. But he got convicted. And then I say, hey, let's go back, a step or two, backwards and introduce this new evidence, and then maybe show that his conviction was politically motivated, or that even the prosecution, it didn't do their job very well.
I mean, I'm concerned as to how this will, look to the average individual in France. Sarkozy is now under strict judicial supervision and barred from leaving France. Do you think this is restrictive enough for the kind of crime that he committed? And what message is this sending, really?
Well, I mean, again, there's law for some people, there's another law for, the same law for other people, and then it's applied for them. Of course, Sarkozy's, even if he goes somewhere, he's not going to be in hiding. He's a politically exposed individual. Where is he going to go? So he's going to stay in France and go through this whole process and then introduce, like he said, he's going to spend his energy to prove that he was innocent or that he's innocent. And that's what everybody wants to see how this works. Because if he's successful in doing it, then, it will show that the French prosecutorial team or system, is broken. If it's able to prove that his trial was politically motivated. But again, the law students and scholar of justice are just waiting to see what this is. And then, books will be written, and then it says a precedent.
Let's even talk about how credible this case really is in the first place, given the case ties, back to alleged funding from late Muammar Gaddafi. How credible would you really say that the claims about Sarkozy's 2007 campaign, financed with illicit funds, does it connect in any way?
Well, money is not air. Money has a DNA. It's, like in US, we say follow the money. If you are able to follow the money, you could see the source, you could see who received it, what are the various channels, to go from the source of the giver to the source of the receiver. That's what they call forensic accounting. If you use that, you could find anybody, the bribe giver and the bribe taker. But again, what does the French law say about campaign financing? Is this something that was open, they can get money from anywhere, or is it something that now they're going back and say he shouldn't have? So if it was a case of there was no law but he did it and they said he broke a moral code to have done it, that's something else. But if there was a campaign financing law that said you cannot receive money from foreigners, then then they will look at that and see where the punishment lies. For instance, in the US, if you're a green card holder and you make contribution in certain things, it may cost you the ability to become a citizen. Or even as a foreigner and you fund a campaign, so most countries have their rules. So let's see what the French one says about getting money from, Gaddafi is no longer alive, whether that will be an issue like, hey, okay, he cannot testify on his behalf and the allegation is false. But again, like I said, money is a DNA. If through forensic accounting, how did he get the money he got? Was it wired? Was it delivered in a diplomatic bag to him and he's, using it to do what he did?
Let's look at, this perception. I understand that you've mentioned that, some countries have their own laws, but it really raises the concern about what the average French person will really say about the situation. Let's not, put aside the fact that this is a conspiracy case. This perception that an ex-president could actually serve just a fraction of his own sentence, does this not undermine the public confidence in France's justice system, especially for citizens who see a double standard between elite and ordinary citizens?
Well, all of the above. Again, remember, average people are average people. You can't compare an average Frenchman to a former president. But here is what I believe: if nobody's above the law, if you can prove, if you can make the case, through evidence that a president, there have been presidents that went to jail. If it's a former president or a former governor or senator, whatever the case may be, they broke the law, the law should apply to them. But sometimes it takes a longer process because they have the resources, they have all kinds of things that they can bring to fore to help them make their case, as opposed to somebody who don't even have the money, doesn't even know what to do, and they go in and plea. Sometimes when you look at some of these cases, you see citizens just go in and say, hey, I'll take a plea, even though I'm innocent, but they don't have the resources to go through the trial process and the damage. When you get indicted, there's a psychological thing that go with it. And so most people don't want to go through that. But the former president, obviously, has his reputation that he's being called to question, and he's going to want to do everything he can. But again, he's gone behind bars for 3 weeks. That record is there, even if he's found not to have done this stuff, and he's granted a pardon or clemency. He's still that, hey, one time he went behind bars. So the average citizen should get a comfort in that. But they should also recognize that because, a lizard, a cat jumped into a pool because a lizard did it doesn't mean, both of them, one is going to come out and need a whole lot of help to get dry, because the lizard can come out, shake their body off and keep going, so that's what it is. Never do because somebody's doing, do because you can handle it when the pressure comes or when the exposure or the limelight is, shown on you, and then you're able to, prove your innocence.
Let's bring Africa into the discussion now. Sarkozy's case, how does it affect France's diplomatic standing, particularly in Africa and the Middle East, where this alleged Libyan funding originated, and where France continues to, wield influence across countries in Africa?
Well, it's very unfortunate. If you are a scholar of international politics, there's a book I want to recommend. It's called "Chances of a Lifetime." It was written by former U.S. Secretary of State Warren Christopher, and when he left, when he was about to leave that office, and Madeleine Albright became, Secretary of State, he wrote a book, and that book actually pointed, in that book, he made a comment: France should hands off their remote control on African, Francophone countries. But he said that, but the Africans, the French Africans, supposed to be the ones that stand up for themselves, but they haven't been able to do it. And then even if you go to the Western Hemisphere, to Haiti, Haiti is still suffering under some influence of France. So it makes you wonder, for all this time, we know what is holding somebody. We know what is choking somebody, but you are not able to do it. So what the African countries need to do is just like the case of, what is his name, Paul Biya in Cameroon. Paul Biya is more like a grandfather to Macron. But he has to run over there and kiss his fingers, ring and bow to him and seek his support. Certain things you do, and you said, I'm older than you. I'm not going to come, kissing you or whatever. You're behind in order for me to do it. If you're going to act as an independent nation, then show the person who formally colonized you that I'm independent. The one country that did it and did it successfully was Singapore. When they went to the British Commonwealth folks and the British government and said, the divorce is final, I'm out of here. If you don't make your ex-spouse jealous, you're not doing anything. And that's what is holding most African countries. They haven't been able to walk away from their former colonial people. It's just like in the case when people campaign for Nigerian political thing, they go to Chatham House. What is that for? How does the British people interpret, say, hey, look at these people, we let them go 60-something years ago, but they still run to us for everything. So you gotta, again, like I said, the divorce is final. Don't call your ex and say, I'm missing you, can you come over, blah, blah. No, make them jealous. And that's how they're gonna respect you.
Mr. Ejike, from your response, I think you are taking me to the conversation about President Trump's attempt at Nigeria and the reactions that it has, sparked in the past few weeks. I was going to ask you really about, concerns that Sarkozy's legal battles reflect a wider trend of, politicized prosecutions in Africa. I'd like you to hold on your thought. We'll take a short break now, and then when I come back from the break, we'll continue this conversation. You're still watching The World Now. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us on World Now. We're still having the conversation about former French President Nicolas Sarkozy, who has been released from jail from a 5-year sentence, having spent just 3 weeks in jail. We're talking about how this, really impacts on France's judicial system. We're still having this conversation with global affairs analyst Ejike Okwa. Mr. Ejike, thank you for staying with us. Right before the break, I was talking about our critics saying that Sarkozy's legal battles, reflect a wider trend of politicized prosecutions in France. Do you think that the judiciary itself is acting independently here?
It's always harder to take, to say, who's acting independently and who's been influenced. I think it's when the evidence, since we're in court or since he's in court, let the evidence say otherwise. If the evidence were to be reintroduced or introduced, because he never introduced that, if introduced and he proves that, then he can now say, hey, this is a politicized judicial system. It was a political thing. They came after me because they were afraid I was going to win, or whatever the case may be. You never know. There's a witch hunting thing that goes on in politics, whether in a developed country or one that is developing. It's a human factor. Politics is a human factor, and some people, for whatever reason, may just want to undermine you and weaken you or wound you. This is a scar. At the end of the day, if they have inflicted the scar on you, and then you're going to be the one, that's going to bear it until, you move on. But then, scholars of history and justice will start writing books and theories about it. Because from the time human beings found themselves, and, you can't play politics with yourself. That's got to be more than you. Even from our family settings to village to country, you have to see that, But what has happened now, we come up with laws and rules to make it at least be, impartial. But you remember, human beings are the ones who are, practicing this stuff, and they're going to find a way to put, throw you a curveball, and then you start scrambling. But, what I always say, if don't do it. If you do it, own up to it, or take the heat. Take the heat. If you go back to the Nigerian situation, you ask yourself, of all the presidents that have actually inflicted more damage on Nigeria, how come nobody's ever gone to jail? And then even look at even the legal practice, and how many Nigerian lawyers have been suspended for practices that are considered unethical, or how many real estate people, or how many bankers in Nigeria. So, these things should be something that Nigerians or Africans look around and say, we have to do better. How come even when some of the former African people take money from the system, they run to this country and they live happily ever after. Come on, chase them, pursue them. Even if you can make an example with one person, maybe that will send a message. Just like what was that other guy Nigeria wanted to kidnap and bring him into Nigeria, and that attempt was foiled. But you cannot fold your hands. Nation building is not when you succeed you fold your hands. It's ongoing, because
it's an ongoing process, ensuring accountability on all sides, ensuring that those in power are held accountable. That's a step that Africa is taking. But that's a fine place to leave the conversation. We're hoping that if not guilty, Sarkozy is able to rehabilitate his public image, even as one of France's conservative leaders. Mr. Ejike, thank you for joining us at this time.
Well, thank you for having me.
Away from that.